Joining us now, Congressman, 3rd District, Democrat in Virginia, Bobby Scott. Congressman, good to have you with us.
Good to be with you, John. How are you?
Never better. We have so much to talk about, so little time. Just minutes ago, we find out that the president has fired Rex Tillerson. He's out as Secretary of State. He is replacing him with CIA Director Mike Pompeo. Then he's naming to take over the CIA Gina Haspel. She will be the first female to be the director of the CIA in the nation's CIA history. What do you think of these moves?
Well, they seemed fairly abrupt. I mean, we're in the middle of the situation in North Korea where they're trying to do diplomatic discussions. And in the middle of that, right after the announcement, you fire the Secretary of State. One of the criticisms of the president's move was that a presidential meeting should be the culmination of successful diplomacy, not the beginning. And so when you go into such discussions, it looks like not a lot of thought was into it. Obviously, he's firing the Secretary of State. No one in the White House apparently knew what was going on. Several within the days leading up to that, it said that there were no discussions going on. Then all of a sudden, you have a presidential high-ranking discussion. Well, anyway, discussion is better than name-calling, but we don't know what's on the table for discussion. And you fire the Secretary of State right in the middle of it, no ambassadors in the area. It just seems a little haphazard.
Do you think the president has an opportunity with this meeting with the North Korean dictator to maybe get some real concessions made that might have a long-lasting impact, or do you view it with skepticism and wariness?
Well, you don't know, and the reason no one else has met with the leaders in North Korea is because when they do the initial negotiations, there didn't seem any potential of doing anything. The idea that you start with a presidential meeting, you don't know what you're starting with. Maybe something good will happen, but you get there sitting across from the table, and North Korea says, "Well, we will denuclearize as soon as you do." Now, what are you going to say? I mean, you just don't know. You don't know what's coming, and you go in without an agenda. And the reason the presidential visit is the last thing is all of what's been done. So you just don't know, and you just hope for the best, but you just don't know.
Let's get to former Congressman, former CIA Director, now incoming after he's confirmed, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo from Kansas. Yeah, who served with Pompeo. He was a colleague of yours. What do you think of him?
I didn't get to know him very well. He seems fairly competent, but I just didn't get to know him very well. He was at the CIA, and you haven't heard much from the CIA, and that's a good thing. When the CIA is in the news, things aren't going well.
Right. Right.
I mean, it's like umpires and election officials. Anytime their names are in the paper, it's not a good day.
That's right, exactly.
I don't know, but you knew Tillerson was in trouble from the time he didn't deny that he called the president a moron.
Right.
And the president likes to do things haphazardly. Hopefully, Mike will come in and get things kind of in order. But I can't really say what his agenda is going to be.
Well, Pompeo and Trump seem to have a good relationship. So we'll start there. Hopefully good things come out of it. All right, let's get to this banking bill. Congressman, I'm a Republican, as you know, and I'm not in favor of it. Many people are calling it, for lack of a better term, the bank lobbying bill. Look, Dodd-Frank came into being for one reason, because of the bank failures that we had and the improper activity that went on and all the shenanigans that took place in the Wall Street and within banks and things that they were doing to drive their profits, because they knew at the end of the day the federal government ensured them they get bailed out. That was the genesis of Dodd-Frank. Now this new banking bill, many of those backing it are saying that, well, the restrictions on community banks are too cumbersome and we got to take the shackles off, and that's why community banks are getting eaten up and Main Street is getting replaced with Wall Street. But you look at this bill and a lot of the so-called regulations to protect against what happened to us in 2008, they're making the cutoff here, a bank with assets under $250 billion. I mean, that covers some major U.S. institutions.
Well, apparently it covers 25 of the 38 largest banks, and the present level of $50 billion covers most of what you would think of as a community bank. I mean, $50 billion. I mean, you've got to be, one of the top banks in the country to get anywhere close to that. I'm not sure we've got any banks that in Hampton Roads that aren't obviously national banks that are not already covered by the $50 billion threshold. And what people have to remember what happened in 2008. The only thing that's surprising about that is nobody went to jail. But obviously, there were a lot of crimes being committed. I was surprised, quite frankly, that nobody went to jail. You had people on television. I saw one guy on 60 Minutes, and he got his job because he could sign his name fast, and therefore he could fraudulently he could create fraudulent documents quicker than the next guy, so he got the job. I mean, why he's signing things under oath? How is he not in jail? And so you have nobody in jail, and if people aren't going to go to jail, and if you're too big to fail and too big to jail, then we have to have some regulations that problems won't occur. And I think I haven't seen the evidence to suggest that going above $50 billion, and I even think that's pretty high. I think we need a little more studying before we accept that kind of increase. Why you have to go to 250 is another question. You only have a handful of banks over that, so I'm a little concerned.
Okay, so just to get the facts out there, and we're with Congressman Bobby Scott, represents the 3rd District of Virginia, and that is on the southeastern part of Virginia, the Hampton area, Newport News, in and throughout there, Democratic Congressman Bobby Scott. So, Congressman, 25 of the 28 largest banks in the United States would be affected by what I'm calling the Great Bank Lobbying Bill of 2018. That's really all it is. 25 of 28 banks are under 250.
25 of 38.
I'm sorry, 25 of 38, which is 67% of all banks in the United States are covered under the asset top of $250 billion. So when they say about taking the regulations off of community banks so they can compete, I mean, to me, they would have lowered the number to maybe 25 billion and taken the regulations off. But it seems to, what is driving this? Like, when the lobbyists come into your office, share with us. When the great banking lobbyists walk into your office and they're trying to sell you on this bill, what are they saying to you?
I don't remember them trying to sell me on this bill. I think they would have me listed as a lost cause.
What are they telling your colleagues?
I don't know. Well, the argument is that community banks, small banks, don't have the wherewithal to keep up with all the burdensome regulations. Okay. But, I mean, small banks, I mean, like Old Point National Bank is about $1 billion. Farm Bank's about 10. I mean, at some point, you have to. And if smaller banks go broke, it doesn't take down the whole system. Mm-hmm. When you've got $50 billion in assets going south, I mean, you're causing significant problems. And I don't know. I haven't been convinced that going above that is necessary. And as you suggested, I think there's some pretty big banks that are way under $50 billion already. And so the need, I haven't seen the need. And so I haven't seen much of an argument, and they haven't made much of an argument to me.
Yes.
So, it saves them some money.
The argument, really, this bill, in my judgment, is a disguise and a facade. It's masquerading as let's get regulations off of small community mainstream banks so that they can compete effectively, and the regulations under Dodd-Frank are too burdensome for them, all true. And we all hanker back to the time as small business owners like me, where you could go to your Main Street bank and you went to church with the bank president, and you played golf with them.
And that would cover banks in the 1 to 2 billion,
exactly,
10 or 15 billion level.
Exactly. So if I need a piece
after that,
right.
It just seems that we need, and what it does is prevents these banks from getting into speculative,
right,
reckless investments,
right.
And if they go bad, they take the whole system down.
Right.
It'll come to the House. Hopefully, we'll have hearings and we'll get more information, and we'll be able. There are a lot of different provisions that were hidden in the bill.
Yep.
But the 50 going from 50 billion to 200 and a quarter of $1 trillion. You didn't have a few years. It's been just a few years where a $1 billion bank was a big deal.
That's right.
10 billion, a huge deal.
Right.
So like you said, it covers. There would only be a handful of banks in the country that would be covered by the regulation. And it seems to me that if only 38 banks were covered to begin with, that it can't be too burdensome.
This is the great bank lobbying bill of our time in order for the majority of banks in the United States to become more reckless and to make more profit, and for their CEOs and shareholders to get bigger bonuses. And if something goes down, they get bailed out. I mean, it's not a bad deal, right? So that's where they pay these lobbyist firms bajillions of dollars.
We don't blame them for their interests. We just have to make sure that their interests are aligned with the public interest before you vote for something.
Well, do you think that the interest of Wells Fargo, do you think that their CEO's interest was aligned with anybody's interest except for him and his senior executives and his core stakeholders when they defrauded how many? How many people did they defraud?
I think it was
millions of people defrauded.
Thousands, millions.
And what happened there? Not a damn thing happened, Congressman. Nothing happened.
And I don't know how this bill would help that situation.
Nothing happened.
It would not help.
It wouldn't help. Look, this is the great bank rip-off lobbying bill of all time. Whenever the lobbyists come out of the swamp in their limos and they walk around, you can see them in there in the banking committee building in their $10,000 suits and $30,000 watches. Right away, you know you're in big trouble. Congressman, let's get to Trump's tariffs. As you know, I'm a protectionist. I'm in favor of them. I absolutely believe his 25% tariff on steel and aluminum are the right things to do. They're going to bring our steel and aluminum jobs back to the United States. We've already seen U.S. Steel opening up a new plant, 500 workers, a new aluminum plant in Pennsylvania, 3,000 workers. The average job pays $85,000. How do you stand on it?
Well, frankly, I don't know. We haven't had hearings. We don't know exactly what the impact is going to be. We have been told that there are about 60,000 jobs that will be protected with the tariff, but 6 million jobs at risk. I don't know how at risk those jobs will be, what the risk is. We know that many of our products, if you're buying steel, like automobiles or Navy ships, your costs are likely to go up as a result of the tariffs. It was not clear that any analysis was done. Again, this announcement was made. The White House officials in the White House didn't see it coming, and so you don't know what the analysis would show. I would say that when he exempted Canada and Mexico, he essentially made the whole thing meaningless because China can ship their steel to Canada. Businesses in Canada can add a little price to it and then send it to the United States. So unless it is a complete barrier where everybody has a tariff, if there are holes in it, there's a serious question as to whether or not it can be effective. The rationale bothers me. He says national security as the rationale. I understand that Secretary of Defense had indicated before that there was no national security implication in steel. We can produce domestically all we need for our defense needs. And so the idea that national defense is all of a sudden the rationale opens the door for other countries to use that same excuse to put tariffs on American products. So we don't know yet, but I don't think the appropriate level of analysis has been done.
Okay, so I'm going to agree with you on 2 out of the 3 things. Number one, I agree. I really think that the whole national defense argument is just kind of a talking point. We're only producing 37% of our capacity of U.S. steel. So if we had to build a submarine or a ship, we have the capacity to be able to do that. Now, is it a good thing if your steel industry evaporates? No. I think that it is a concern. And maybe the argument is to say that it could affect national defense in the future if our steel and aluminum industries continue to get decimated and finally we don't have any. So that is possible. But I don't really think that's the core of the argument. I think this is an economic argument. I agree with you 100%. I was opposed to giving Canada and Mexico the carve-out, even though it's for the bigger negotiations with a NAFTA, because I think exactly what you said. The steel can come from China to Canada. They put a plastic stamp on it, and then they ship it into the U.S. So that, to me, muddied the whole waters, and I know the president felt that he had to give his party something, and that was kind of what they came up with. As far as the surprise attack, the president did this on purpose, Congressman, because he knew that if he started to get the hearings on it, or if he announced it slowly, that his party, not the Democrats, but the Republican Party, would go crazy over it, and they'd stop it, just like the NRA stopped any of his compromise on gun legislation after Parkland. Remember, the president said just a week ago, maybe we should look at universal background checks. Maybe we should look at not selling a gun to somebody until they're 21 years old. They can't buy a handgun. They shouldn't be able to buy an AR-15. NRA goes crazy, and that's the end of that. Same thing with the tariffs. So I think that's why the president did this, but I'll go with you on 2 of the 3 of them. But you get the final.
There's a lot of stuff going on that kind of hits you by surprise. The Department of Labor has a rule on tips that a lot of people aren't aware of. If you go to a restaurant and tip a waitress, under present expectation, it's the waitress's money. They have a rule pending in the Department of Labor that would allow the restaurant owner to confiscate all the tips.
Horrible.
For a lot of their workers, and I don't think people are going to see that one coming either. There's also I was appointed to the multi-employer pension committee. We have a situation now where hundreds of thousands, possibly millions of people may see their pensions evaporate because the pension funds never recovered from the 2008 stock market crash, and the fallout from that may have significant effects on several Fortune 500 companies. Some counties in Southwest Virginia depend on pensions, income earned by pensions to pay their local real estate tax. If they're not receiving their pensions, they're going to have trouble paying those taxes. A lot of people are going to go on food stamps and Medicaid, and so we're on the hook for possibly hundreds of billions of dollars if these pensions go south. So I'm part of the 16-member committee to come up with a solution for all of that. So I mean, there's a lot going on in Washington that is kind of under the radar, but the banking and tariffs are just 2 of the things that we're dealing with.
Well, that's why we have to get you on, Congressman, on a regular basis. I've been in touch with your staff for that, and hopefully we could do that. And I'm glad you're serving on the pension fund, and this being able to confiscate your tips to servers, I think, is just one of the most appalling cash grabs I've ever seen. It turns my stomach. Hopefully we can continue to fight that. Congressman Time, thanks for being with us here on the John Fredericks Radio Network. Thank you so much, Congressman Bobby Scott.